Hi, I'm Dr. Alison Kole, sleep medicine specialist and bona fide chronic insomniac. Welcome to the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. Remember, knowledge is empowerment, and if applied correctly, it can help you biohack your way to a better night of sleep, just like I did. If this resonates with you, please follow me on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. All right, guys. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. I am your host, Dr. Alison Kole, and I have with me Dr. Mike Yurcheshen. I nailed it.
You did.
Yes.
You're like phonetically on point.
It only took like a week and some mortification to get it right, but I did eventually. Mike, it's so good to speak with you again. I have always been candid with you that I really appreciate your ability to see all sides, the good and the potentially the concerns that one might have with various issues. We had spoken last time about telemedicine. So bringing up consumer wearable technology, you had been on the American Academy of Sleep Medicine Consumer and Clinical Technology Committee that was back in 2018. And I see that they've now had some updated guidelines. Welcome. Thank you again for your time. I truly appreciate it. I wanted to really pick your brain about what the potential benefits might be of this technology, but also what are the potential concerns. So I'm labeling this episode the good, the bad, the ugly, but it's going to be the consumer wearables version versus the telemedicine version. So I guess to start, what you guys did in the 2018 position paper is just start to define the terms that we're using, because you and I might assume that things are sort of interchangeable, or even the public might assume that they're interchangeable. But I think you guys you kind of broke it down a bit in the 2018 position paper. So when you talk about consumer sleep technology, is that just sort of like the umbrella term and then you specify, if that makes sense?
We cast a pretty wide net, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the practical things that came out of, as an extension of that position paper, but also the committee, was a database that the ASM keeps up. This is basically, at this point, it's been a little while since I've seen it, but 100 plus different technologies, if you will, or products that have been made and are on the market. And some of them are wearable, some of them are nearable, and some of them are just like, it's hard to characterize them, honestly, of all kinds. I think there's a lot of interest in the wearable technologies just because they're accessible. Many of them are affordable, especially with every passing year, the technology gets better and better, I guess I would say, and the price points come down. So I think quite a number of those that you'll see reviewed are wearables, but we certainly have had reviews of many other types.
So by wearable, we're talking about technological devices that actually people can wear. So I'll give you some examples. Like I'm wearing an Oura Ring. That would be a wearable. I'm wearing an Apple Watch. That would be a wearable, or a Fitbit, or one of those types of things.
Yeah.
And then you have your apps, which are basically that's a program. And those apps may support a wearable or be used to otherwise assess or use a different instrument. And then we also have, and I don't know if this would fit into it, but the cognitive behavioral therapy apps. Was that rolled into some of this, or was that sort of kept separately?
We did discuss that, but I think at the time we had elected not to review that particular genre of programming. Those apps we certainly discussed, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've had, just in my clinical experience, and maybe you too, have had kind of mixed relationship with technologies. Probably, in my opinion, the power really kind of lies in aggregate, right? So like if you can collect data from a lot of people and then analyze it, then you may have trends to follow, whatever it is that you're interested in. But on an individual basis, I've had kind of a mixed bag of whether it's helpful or not. But having said that, and you may be familiar with this, there are a number of different apps that record sound. This can be really useful. I mean, in sleep medicine, it's a little bit of a challenge to sometimes get a history because the patient is asleep, right? They're sleeping and they're unconscious. So you ask them, do you snore? They don't have a bed partner. The answer is often, I don't know. Or do you stop breathing in your sleep? I don't know. I mean, it's not a very complicated program, but it basically records and then analyzes, in several different ways, including like kind of a visual, digital way, whether you're snoring or not. And so that can actually be somewhat useful in terms of like supporting history.
Now, you had also mentioned a term called nearables. So could you give us a couple examples of what you mean by a nearable?
What I just mentioned, that's an example, right? That happens to be an app, but that's not something that you're wearing on your person. That's something that might be at the bedside. A number of the smart beds, I mean, there's one large kind of manufacturer out there, but that's not something that you wear. It's something that you're lying on or upon, and that's recording information from you. And so those are just examples, but there are others as well.
What I thought was interesting was when the updated sort of position statement from 2021 actually also threw in a couple of other new terms that people might hear about, basically hybrid technology versus transitional technology, which I thought was sort of interesting. Have you been following any of that at all?
I guess in a way we all have, just because what hybrid basically refers to is a space in between a consumer technology and something that's for clinical use. So something that's been FDA approved or at least cleared that you can rely on to make clinical decisions. But this gray area in the middle is pretty large, and you have to get pretty deep in the weeds with each of these individual products. Many of them have not been validated and frankly don't want to be validated for whatever it is that the data seems to show you. So whether it's sleep staging, for instance, which is common, or total sleep time, or WASO, or something like this.
WASO being wake after sleep onset, just to interject what that means.
Thank you. Here's just an example. So hybrid means kind of like that very gray area we were just talking about, but you're probably familiar with this. I'm not going to call it a crisis, but like this challenge that our field is undergoing with the sunsetting of the ActiWatch. So the ActiWatch is a validated actigraphy, basically. So it's a wristwatch that records movement, and it's been on the market for well over a decade, maybe 2 to 3. And a lot of researchers use it and clinicians use it as well for a way to basically longitudinally assess somebody's sleep at home or over time, basically. The parent company of ActiWatch is no longer going to support that. And so now everyone is looking for solutions. And to be honest with you, what stepped in the meantime are a lot of these technologies that people are wearing already. So like these wearables. Many of them may not be validated, or that particular version of the software isn't validated. But if you're using it as basically kind of confirmatory evidence or supporting evidence for things that you're just suspecting clinically, it's just another piece to the puzzle. So that's where I see that kind of that hybrid piece fitting in a very real way at this moment in time.
And we're only, if you're looking at how you conduct research, especially with sleep, and if you are doing something and you're trying to make it cost effective, the actigraphy, the ActiWatch, things of that type of technology that's been validated actually has a lot of utility because you sort of trust what that data is showing you. And it's way cheaper than sending everybody to an in-lab for a sleep study, right? So the problem is that now if we move away from having something that's that validated and where the company is transparent about what that data shows, and you don't have something that's been validated to be in alignment or agreement with you, quote unquote, gold standard for actigraphy, for lack of a better term, you run the risk of having data that may not really tell you the truth, right?
Right. Well, I mean, just to give you a sense of the challenges with this ActiWatch that I mentioned to you, this is like basically has been the gold standard for this wearable technology for decades. And even that, in terms of validation, like total sleep time is, as compared to polysomnography, is pretty much on target. And I believe the WASO for that as well, but in normal populations. So not sleep staging, doesn't give you that data, and not in a population that may have sleep challenges, people with insomnia or circadian rhythm disorders or something like that. It's often used in cases like that, but it's never been validated. And that's the gold standard, right? And those are the people who wanted this technology specifically for this purpose. When you have countless companies who are manufacturing these, many of which don't really have an interest in validating this for a variety of reasons, you do have to view their whole enterprises with some degree of skepticism. And this is where I say, I think it's just useful as kind of supporting or confirmatory evidence for something that you suspect clinically, and or just to open up a conversation with people. So people say, look, I don't sleep very well, and my smartwatch or this phone just supports this. And it just a way for you to kind of just be more engaged, I think, in what they're experiencing.
So, one of the things that I think it could be useful for consumer wearables, despite some of the issues that we were just discussing in terms of how accurate everything is, it's not, PSG versus this consumer wearable, and that we have this transparent data. That just simply is not something that is shared with us, right? For those folks, especially if they have like a circadian rhythm disorder, or I'm suspicious that something's going on, or that I just think they have a really wacky sleep schedule. Sometimes, if they're willing to be consistent with usage, it's kind of, at least they could show you like a tabulature of the week. You might be able to pick out a certain pattern, even if it's not perfect in terms of total sleep time, or how frequently you're waking up in the middle of the night, which is the wake after sleep onset that we were talking about, or the WASO. Just that general trend. Have you found any of that useful in your clinical practice at all?
I do see that. I think it's kind of an offshoot of what we were just talking about. I've also seen the opposite of that too. There's a condition, it goes by a couple different names, paradoxical insomnia or sleep misperception syndrome is another name for this. This is basically where the sleep is totally normal, stone cold normal, but the patient has the perception that they're not sleeping at all for days at a time, weeks, months even, and which is just not biologically possible, really. I've had a number of cases where folks present like this, and they happen to have a watch that is recording this. And a lot of times the patient's already aware before they came in. They say, my watch says that I'm getting 8 hours of sleep a night, but I don't believe it. Right?
Oh, yeah. That's a great example.
It's just really interesting. I mean, that's a very difficult condition to treat. This is when you have that kind of supporting, you kind of suspect it clinically anyway, because just the near impossibility of going that long without sleep. But then when you have other evidence, albeit flawed, you can just, again, it's kind of supporting evidence for your clinical impression for those people.
For those people, I like to convince them to do a sort of minimally invasive home test, just so I get some objective data of what's going on that I feel is validated in terms of, and again, home sleep testing. We can open Pandora's box of some criticisms about some of the data that some of those devices actually give you, even though they are validated for obstructive sleep apnea. But I feel like it can be helpful in saying, okay, well, I have this thing, and at least the way their algorithm, they're at least sharing with us how they're getting to their calculated total sleep time and that sort of thing. So I think that correlating with their wearable technology can sometimes be helpful. Have you found that too?
Yeah, it's recommended that we do some kind of objective test that's been validated. I wouldn't, make the diagnosis solely on that, but that's one piece of the puzzle that we didn't have 10 years ago, right, or 15 years ago, kind of supportive. And this is the state of the technology today, right, in 2023. I mean, I expect these things to get better. I don't know whether the assessments are going to be better, because I don't really see right now a business model where a lot of these companies are going to benefit from doing that, which is, I think, is part of the hurdle. In my mind, these technologies could be validated, and I would say somewhat easily. And some of them are. The studies are not that difficult to run and conduct. But if you do that, then you get FDA clearance for your device for whatever it is you're supposed to be measuring. Then you're kind of on the hook, right, for whatever it is. And, that I'm thinking specifically about, say, sleep apnea, which can be a very, very serious condition for many of our patients, but it's very common. So I think when you say Pandora's box, I'm quite confident that many of these technologies could diagnose sleep apnea tomorrow, right? I mean, it exists, but whether the companies want to take the time, effort, money, and then also in some ways be responsible for that. There's parallels with like atrial fibrillation, which is a heart condition. Those technologies exist, but atrial fibrillation is relatively uncommon compared to obstructive sleep apnea. There'd be millions of people who don't have a diagnosis right now that would just tomorrow show up at their doctor's office with this kind of event. And then the other challenge is that every time they make an update, are they going to validate that too, right? You change your software a little bit, or you change your hardware a little bit. And so then you have to do the same studies over and over again. Not have to, but ideally that's what you'd be doing.
I did want to go back a bit and just discuss a little bit of the sleep staging. And we were discussing it a bit about home sleep testing as well. A lot of the home sleep tests that I've had experience with, they'll give you that information. But I could tell you right now, if I had a relatively easy case, like a pattern of somebody where I'm seeing them have evidence that they're desaturating in a pattern that's in about an hour and a half to 2 hours after they fall asleep. And they mention that they slept well. And I'm looking at, what I can clearly see to be REM related obstructive sleep apnea, and it's not correlating with the generated sleep architecture on the home test. The same thing applies to some of these consumer wearables in terms of folks feeling concerned about, gee, my watch is saying I only get blank percentage of deep sleep. And is that really bad? So you get to this whole issue that arises just with an over concern with what the consumer technology is telling you, aka we've of course have to put a fancy name to everything in medicine, which is orthosomnia. So can you talk a bit about that for us?
Yeah, so this is a relatively new phenomenon, they kind of coexisting with the rise of this technology, but it's preoccupation and getting a good or perfect night's sleep as measured by, any of these technologies. I guess you can put it in the category of infatuation or, just some kind of preoccupation with how well you are sleeping and how healthy you are as based on numbers that are, on a screen or sleep staging, as you put it, on a screen. We do have patients who are like that. If I could give you an example, I saw a patient with one of our fellows about a month ago who was a serious athlete, an older gentleman, triathlons and things like that. And he wanted to come in because he was interested in biohacking. So this is, not just sleep, but like nutrition and exercise with basically the sole reason or primary reason of basically living as long as you can, right? So you're trying to optimize everything. And sleep is really a big part of this community. And he had some version of a wearable and was tracking his sleep. And really, from his history and data I could get from his watch, it seemed normal for his age, somewhere in the 50s. And he was still interested in somehow further optimizing his sleep. And this is probably a topic for another podcast, I would say. But there's very little we can do as sleep specialists to kind of change sleep staging around slow wave sleep and REM sleep, etc. We don't have that many tools to directly affect those things. And generally we don't. And number three, it's not even clear that the sleep that you were getting when you were 20 is appropriate or healthy for you when you're 50 or 70. But in his case, he was also an athlete, so he was looking to get an edge too on his competition. This gentleman happened to be what we have advanced sleep phase, which basically means he's a lark, he's a morning person. And I said, look, you've already biohacked it, right? It had nothing to do with your watch or the technology, but you're a morning person, and most of these competitions start early. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 would be late, right? I mean, because some of these things take all day. So you've already biohacked it. You're at an advantage compared to some of your other competitors who are not morning people, right? And their peak performance may not be, his peak performance is likely slightly earlier than everybody else. So just by virtue of the timing of the competition and his innate circadian rhythm. And, I think he accepted that as an answer, even though it had nothing to do with, medication or supplements or, really taking advantage of the info he had from his wearable.
That's a really interesting point, in terms of how some people will perceive. And it sounds like he was very receptive to that information. But there are going to be folks, in one of the things that was published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, it was a few case reports. So this is not a large sampling of folks, but the case reports, and I could say that I've probably seen it a few times in my clinical practice as well. There are folks who are kind of the opposite. Like you're telling them and they kind of realize that there are wearables giving them certain data, but that doesn't really jive with how they perceive things. And one of the observations, I'll use that as the term, observations is for some of the clinicians was that actually was kind of hard to change people's opinion of what the data is showing them. Have you seen that?
Getting back to the case of like the sleep misperception syndrome, I mean, that's the extreme case, but that's somebody who was those are people who are very wedded into that particular paradigm, right? I'm not sleeping at all. They don't have a good awareness of what sleep feels like and how it refreshes them. And the reason why the population is difficult to treat is it's kind of like delusional thinking. I mean, this is a firm, fixed idea that is not based in reality. And this is a challenge. I'm not a psychiatrist, but psychiatry colleagues, the delusions are very, very difficult to treat. And the truth is that for people who have insomnia, which is, a big chunk of people that you and I see, there is often some degree of sleep misperception, maybe not to that extreme, but often people kind of underrepresent the amount of sleep that they're actually getting. And so when you present information to them to the contrary, even if it's, on the phone, it's not always that helpful because it doesn't fit into the paradigm that they already have kind of set up in their minds. So it's helpful to me, but it may not be helpful to them. And, eventually the treatment is probably that we would recommend is probably not at all dependent on their technology. And if they're open to that, and I think you used a good term, I mean, to be receptive to the advice that you're getting from the medical professionals, whether it's a physician, an APP, or a behavioralist, that is really the key. And how wedded they are or not into that info they're getting from their technology.
I had one other thought, and it's sort of sleep adjacent, is what I will call it, about where I think that wearables could be useful. And this is where I use them. I don't like to sleep with a lot of stuff on. So I take all of this tchotchke off and charge it. Plus, my Apple Watch is going to die by like 6 p.m. today because of all the pings I get from Arlo cameras and all other sorts of nonsense. So I really find it helpful in reminding me. And again, I can't speak to the validity or the accuracy of all this, but just in counting steps and like how active I am, I use it more to just make sure that I'm on target with not sitting my butt down and not doing my NEAT, not moving enough when I'm doing my day job, if you will, where I'm sitting in front of a computer, sitting in front of patients for a lot of the time. So kind of mimicking what you're doing in movement and being like, okay, well, I have a certain goal in mind that I think is achievable. And if you really notice that you're only getting like 3,000 steps, means you're very sedentary. We know there's some data that actually supports you get 7,000 to 10,000 steps several times a week. Like some of that data looks like it could be a positive for your cardiovascular health. And then what we know is if you move and you're physically tired, so exercise really does help with the quality of your sleep. Do you wear any of that stuff? I notice you wear a regular watch. You're old school.
I don't. Listen, so I was on this committee and I told you this off camera. I'm kind of a Luddite. Technology I appreciate it. It's important for me to understand it, but I don't really use almost any of it. You bring up a good point, and I mean, we are in this career because we feel that sleep is important, and it's really satisfying when you have somebody who is coming to you for help and they haven't slept well, sometimes for years, and you can find a way forward to help them, and that happens with some regularity. And so the awareness without a hyper awareness, right, to put you into that orthosomnia category, but this is something that whether it pings you or you're just having to look through the app, and whether it's about exercise or sleep, that these are important parts of your day. I do think that there's a role to be played. And frankly, you don't need to be validated for that, right? I mean, like sleep is important, period. And so if you have something that tries to kind of keep you on track with that, I think it does serve a purpose, basically. Sleep is generally one of the first things to get squeezed when people get busy. Work, family, life happens. And what do we all do? Well, we go to bed later. We have to get all those things done. And then suddenly you're not getting 7 hours. And maybe some of the listeners, would say 7 hours is a dream. 7 hours would be kind of a minimum that we would recommend for adults. You're getting 6 or 5. And that truly is not healthy and not the way that we want people to go. So if it serves as a reminder to help keep people prioritizing that sort of at least towards the top of the list, I think it serves a purpose.
Awesome. So I guess final thoughts, just to sort of summarize a bit what we talked about, because we covered a lot. The bottom line is that sleep technology, I think we would agree, or consumer wearables for sleep, exercise, etc., it's sort of here to stay. I think it's something that people are very interested in. Just in 2017 data shows that 10% of this entire population is already using a wearable, and 50% have actually thought about getting a wearable. You just need to keep in mind that there are limitations with this technology, including how things are validated. So you got to take the data with a grain of salt. As sleep physicians, I welcome folks to share their data with me if they're willing to do that, so that I may be able to pick up a pattern or two. And if you're really struggling with your sleep, I actually don't mind if you're used to wearing technology, if you decided that you wanted to track it for a bit, just so I could have some data points to kind of try to correlate that with how you feel, what we call your subjective feelings about things, because ultimately sleep is really about, I think, your perception. And if technology can help you have a better perception of that, great. But we just have to keep in mind that for some people, it actually may make your sleep worse. It's not all sunshine and roses in the consumer wearable category. Did I kind of sum it up pretty well? Any other points or final thoughts?
That's well said. It's not going away, and nor should it. There are going to be future generations. We didn't talk at all about implantables. The state of the art right now is going to seem trite even 5 years from now.
Ah, yes. Please let's not go there. It feels like something out of a sci-fi movie to like voluntarily be injected with anything that would track me in any way. I don't know. That makes me maybe it's my age group, but that's a little too sci-fi for my taste. I have to be honest. I'm like,
Right. Well, these technologies are either here or coming, and we're just going to see more and more of it. They have their role and their purpose. Probably the uses are going to expand, and it's something that we as physicians and patients too should just try to leverage to our advantage so that we can get the best results for them as possible.
Well said. Using it for leverage. I love that. Okay, so if you are interested in seeing Dr. Yurcheshen at the University of Rochester, you know where to find him. Go make an appointment. Very smart guy, as you can see. If you're interested in a telemedicine visit with me, you can check me out at oak.care/sleep. We are currently working on the askthesleepmd.com website as well. I am currently seeing patients via telemedicine in the states of California, New Jersey, and Georgia. Also, like and rate us. Say something nice. Thanks. I really hate to have to do this, but these are my terms and disclaimer. This podcast is intended for persons 18 years or older. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The words and other content provided in this podcast and in any linked videos and materials are not intended and should not be construed as medical advice. If the listener or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately licensed physician or other healthcare worker. The views expressed on this podcast and YouTube channel have no relation to those of any academic hospital practice or other institution with which the authors are affiliated. There is a detailed terms of use agreement. You can see it all on the YouTube channel. In the interest of brevity and the fact that it's legalese and really hard to read, I am not going to read it. But accessing, reading, or otherwise using the podcast or YouTube channel does not create a physician-patient relationship between you and me. Providing personal or medical information to me does not create a physician-patient relationship between you or me or any other contributors to this podcast. Nothing contained in the site is intended to establish a physician-patient relationship, to replace the services of a trained physician or healthcare professional, or otherwise to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You hereby agree that you shall not make any medical or health-related decision based in whole or in part on anything contained in the site. You should not rely on any of the information contained in the site and related materials in making medical, health-related, or other decisions. You should consult a licensed physician or appropriately credentialed healthcare worker in your community in all matters relating to your health. You agree to indemnify and hold the author harmless from any claim or demand, including attorney's fees, made by any third party as a result of any content posted or made available to you by the site, any violation of law that occurs by you through the site, or anything you do using the site or the content contained therein. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast.